Imagine this. A Silicon Valley founder signs her bankruptcy papers with one hand and holds a positive pregnancy test in the other. By nightfall, her supportive husband, pharma golden boy Marcus Sterling, announces her pregnancy at a glittering gala, then calls her a failure in front of San Francisco's elite. That's the moment Rachel Montgomery realizes her startup didn't just collapse. It was sabotaged. 3 days later, bed-rested and 8 months pregnant, Rachel discovers something far darker. Stolen patents, fake clinical trials, and a trail of dead scientists tied to Marcus's meteoric rise. The IP, a $500 million fraud. The plan, silence her forever. The flaw? He thinks she's broken. Stay, and you'll hear how a homeless, blacklisted founder walks into the Ritz-Carlton ballroom in a maternity dress, flips a hidden recording, and detonates a criminal empire, while labor pains tick like a countdown. Ready to find out who's really pulling the strings, who switches sides, and what Rachel sacrifices to win? If this hooked you, tap, like so more people find it, drop your wildest prediction in the comments, share it with a friend who loves high-stakes drama, and hit subscribe, because you do not want to miss what happens when justice walks in on heels. Rachel Montgomery sat in the bathroom of her Silicon Valley apartment, staring at two life-changing documents. In her left hand, bankruptcy papers for her tech startup. In her right, a positive pregnancy test. The morning light filtering through the frosted window seemed to mock her with its brightness, illuminating what should have been the happiest moment of her life, but instead felt like the cruelest joke fate could play. "How's the paperwork coming?" Marcus called from the living room, his voice carrying that edge of impatience she'd grown accustomed to over the past year. Ever since her company started struggling, his tone had shifted from supportive to condescending, as if her professional failures had somehow diminished her worth as a person. "Almost done," Rachel replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She placed a protective hand over her stomach. Still flat, but carrying the promise of new life. After 3 years of trying, countless fertility treatments that had drained their savings, she was finally pregnant. This should have been their miracle, their new beginning. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his pharmaceutical executive suit pristine as always, a $3,000 testament to his success while she sat surrounded by the debris of her failure. His eyes, once warm brown pools she could lose herself in, now looked at her with barely concealed irritation. "You need to sign those today. My lawyers are waiting. The sooner we get this bankruptcy filed, the sooner we can move on from this disaster." "I know," Rachel said, tucking the pregnancy test into her pocket. She'd tell him tonight, properly. She'd set up candles, cook his favorite meal, maybe even wear the dress he'd bought her on their honeymoon in Santorini. Maybe this would change everything. Maybe he'd remember why they fell in love. Remember the woman who'd stood beside him when he was just a junior sales rep with big dreams. "Look, Rachel," Marcus said, adjusting his gold watch, the Rolex he'd bought after her company's patents became available for purchase. "I know this is hard, but your startup failed. It happens. Not everyone's cut out for business. You're too soft, too idealistic. The market doesn't care about your vision of democratizing healthcare." The words stung like salt in an open wound, but Rachel forced a smile. She'd gotten good at swallowing her pain lately. "You're right. The good news is you don't have to worry about it anymore. I'll take care of everything, like I always do." He kissed her forehead, a gesture that once meant love, but now felt like a parent patting a child's head. "The charity gala is tomorrow night. Wear the blue dress and try to smile. I need investors to see us as a power couple, not a success story married to a failure." After he left, Rachel returned to the papers. Her company, MedTech Innovations, reduced to legal documents declaring failure. She'd built an AI healthcare platform that could have revolutionized patient care, bringing diagnostic capabilities to underserved communities worldwide. The technology worked. The beta tests had proven that. But without funding, without support, it withered like a plant denied water. Marcus had promised to help, to use his pharmaceutical connections to secure investors. Instead, he'd watched it die with the dispassion of a scientist observing a failed experiment. Worse, she'd discovered later, he'd actively discouraged potential investors, telling them she was emotional and unreliable. She signed her name with a trembling hand. Rachel Montgomery, former CEO, former innovator, former somebody. That evening, she prepared dinner with meticulous care. Coco vin, the dish she'd made on their first anniversary, a bottle of his favorite wine breathing on the counter. She'd wrapped the ultrasound photo in a small gift box, tied with a blue ribbon. They had always talked about wanting a boy first. Her heart raced with anticipation as she heard his key in the door. This would fix everything. A baby would remind him of what mattered: family, love, the future they'd planned together. Marcus came home at midnight, smelling of another woman's perfume, something floral and expensive that made Rachel's stomach turn. I already ate, oh, he said, not even glancing at the elaborately set table. Big client dinner. The Yamamoto deal finally closed. Oh, Rachel said, her voice small. I made your favorite. He was already scrolling through his phone, not looking at her. I told you about the client dinner weeks ago. You need to pay better attention, Rachel. This forgetfulness is probably why your company failed. She hadn't forgotten. He'd never mentioned it. But arguing was pointless. Marcus had a way of rewriting history to suit his narrative. Rachel watched the candles burn down to nothing, the gift box unopened on his empty plate. The cocoa vin congealed in his serving dish. The wine remained uncorked. She pressed her hand against her stomach and whispered, "We'll be okay, little one. Somehow, we'll be okay." But even as she said it, she wondered if she was lying to her unborn child already. The Fairmont Hotel ballroom sparkled with the wealth of San Francisco's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across the marble floors, and waiters in white gloves circulated with champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's car payments. Rachel stood beside Marcus, her blue dress, the one he'd specifically chosen, hiding the slight swell of her 3-month pregnancy. She tried again to tell him that morning, but he'd been on calls with investors, pacing their bedroom, while she sat with the pregnancy test in her hand, waiting for a pause that never came. Marcus Sterling. A group of pharmaceutical executives approached, champagne glasses raised like weapons in a corporate war. Heard you acquired some valuable patents recently. The MedTech acquisition? Marcus laughed, pulling Rachel closer in a gesture that looked affectionate but felt possessive, his fingers digging into her waist hard enough to leave bruises. One of my better investments, but amazing at what you can pick up when startups fail. Fire sale prices for technology worth millions. Rachel's stomach turned. He was talking about her company, her life's work, as if it were a yard sale find. Must be tough, though, one executive said with false sympathy, glancing at Rachel. Having your wife's company fail like that. Oh, it's been a blessing in disguise, Marcus said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Taught us both valuable lessons about knowing our limitations. The group chuckled uncomfortably. Rachel felt her cheeks burn. Speaking of blessings, Marcus continued, his voice carrying across the nearby tables, raising his glass theatrically. I have an announcement. Rachel and I are expecting. Applause rippled through the crowd. Rachel tried to smile, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. This wasn't how she'd wanted to announce it, not as a performance for Marcus's business associates. But then Marcus continued, his voice dripping with condescension. Finally, she'll have something to succeed at, since business wasn't her forte. He laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. Some people are meant to change the world. Others are meant to just reproduce. It's about finding your actual talent level, isn't it, darling? The room went silent for a moment, the kind of silence that follows a car crash. Rachel felt hundreds of eyes on her, some pitying, others amused, all of them seeing her through Marcus's lens, the failed entrepreneur, the trophy wife, the incubator. That's rather harsh, Sterling, someone muttered. Marcus waved dismissively. It's honesty. Rachel appreciates honesty. Don't you, sweetheart? Better to accept reality than chase impossible dreams. Excuse me, Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. I need to use the restroom. She didn't make it. In the hallway, she collapsed against a marble pillar, her breathing shallow and rapid. The panic attack came in waves, each one threatening to drown her. Are you all right, dear? An older woman in pearls stopped beside her. I'm fine, Rachel lied, straightening up. Just morning sickness. The woman's eyes were knowing. I've been married 40 years. That wasn't morning sickness. That was humiliation sickness. Much harder to cure. As the woman walked away, Rachel overheard two investors talking near the coat check. Sterling only married her for those healthcare patents, one said. Smart move. Got them for nothing when her company tanked. Poor girl probably thinks he loves her, the other replied. Though after tonight's display, she must be getting the picture. Did you see her face when he called her a breeder? He didn't use that word. Might as well have. Jesus, the man has no class. Rachel leaned against the wall, fighting nausea that had nothing to do with morning sickness. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she saw a limousine pull up outside, its black surface reflecting the city lights. A small, desperate part of her wished she could disappear into it, drive away, become someone else entirely, someone whose husband didn't view her as a failure, someone whose dreams hadn't been sold to the highest bidder. Rachel? She turned to find David Rothschild, the billionaire venture capitalist who'd once mentored her in Stanford's entrepreneurship program. His kind eyes studied her with concern, taking in her pale face and shaking hands. David, I didn't know you were here. I heard what Marcus said. That was cruel and untrue. David's voice was gentle but firm, carrying the authority of someone who'd built empires from nothing. Your startup didn't fail because you weren't capable. It failed because certain people wanted it to fail. Rachel frowned, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. What do you mean? David glanced around, then guided her to a quiet alcove. Rachel, I've been in this industry for 30 years. I know when a company is sabotaged versus when it naturally fails. Yours was sabotaged. By whom? But even as she asked, she knew. I think you already know the answer. David handed her his business card, the weight of the cardstock substantial in her trembling fingers. Come see me next week, after you've had time to think. Your career doesn't have to be over, Rachel. Not if you don't want it to be. As David walked away, Rachel felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. It was fragile, like a match flame in a storm, but it was there. She returned to the ballroom to find Marcus holding court with a younger woman, a blonde in a red dress that left little to imagination. Jessica Hayes, she realized, the corporate lawyer who'd been handling the patent transfers. There's my wife, Marcus said with false warmth. Feeling better? I was just telling Jessica about your little breakdown. Pregnancy hormones, you know, makes them so emotional. Jessica laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on Rachel's nerves. Oh, I'm never having children. Can't imagine giving up my career to be a mother. Smart woman, Marcus said, his eyes lingering on Jessica's figure. Some women are built for boardrooms, others for nurseries. Evolution, really. That night, Rachel lay in bed while Marcus snored beside her, his arm thrown possessively across her waist, even in sleep. She stared at the ceiling, David's card hidden in her nightstand drawer like a secret lifeline. I'll get us out of this, she whispered to her unborn child. I promise. Rachel stood outside her apartment door at 2 in the afternoon, David's business card burning like hope in her pocket. She'd left the meeting with him early, too excited to contain herself. David had offered to fund her new venture after the baby was born. Not just fund it, but mentor her, introduce her to his network, help her rebuild everything Marcus had helped destroy. You have brilliant ideas, Rachel, David had said. The world needs them. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. She'd stopped at the wine shop on the way home, buying Marcus's favorite vintage and sparkling grape juice for herself. Tonight, she'd share the wonderful news. Maybe it would remind Marcus of the ambitious woman he'd fallen in love with, not the broken one he seemed to see now. The key turned silently in the lock. She'd surprise him. He'd said he was working from home today, reviewing contracts. They could celebrate together, dream together again like they used to. But the surprise was hers. The sounds hit her first. Unmistakable, undeniable. Then the visual as she pushed open their bedroom door. Jessica Hayes was in her bed, in her home, with her husband. The corporate lawyer's designer heels were scattered on Rachel's bedroom floor, her red dress draped over the chair where Rachel usually laid out her clothes for the next day. Rachel! Marcus jumped up, not even attempting to cover himself, as if his nakedness were a power move rather than a vulnerability. You're supposed to be at that meeting until 5. I left early to share good news with my husband, Rachel said, her voice eerily calm, though her hands shook violently. But please, don't let me interrupt. Jessica smirked, making no move to leave or cover herself, instead stretching like a cat in the sun. Marcus, is this going to be a problem? No, Marcus replied, his eyes cold as winter. Rachel was just leaving. Rachel's gaze fell on the coffee table, where legal documents lay spread out like evidence at a crime scene. Her company's patents, transfer agreements, confidential technical specifications, everything. But there was more. Financial documents moving money offshore, emails discussing the disposal of her remaining assets. You're selling my patents? She breathed, picking up a document with her company's logo, now with a red void stamp across it. Marcus laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. Your patents? You signed in bankruptcy papers, remember? They're mine now. Well, ours. He gestured to Jessica. She's brokering the deals. Turns out your little healthcare AI is worth millions to the right buyers. Pharmaceutical companies who want to bury it so it doesn't disrupt their profit margins. Those were meant to help patients, Rachel said, her hands shaking as she read the numbers. 20 million, 30 million, 45 million total. The diagnostic system could save thousands of lives. Children in rural areas could get treatment faster. God, you're still so naive, Jessica said, wrapping herself in Rachel's silk sheet, the one her mother had given them as a wedding gift. Technology isn't about helping people, Rachel. It's about profit. Marcus understands that. It's why he's successful and you're not. We're married, Rachel said weakly, her hand moving to her stomach. We're having a baby. For now, Marcus replied, pulling on his robe, the one she'd bought him for Christmas. But that's being handled too. Jessica's brother is a family court judge. The divorce papers are already drawn up. Abandonment, mental instability, unfit to be a mother. You'll be lucky if you get supervised visitation. You can't do that. I haven't abandoned anyone. I'm not unstable. Marcus moved closer, his breath hot on her face. You had a public breakdown at the gala. Hundreds of witnesses saw you flee in tears. You're on anxiety medication. You failed at business. What court would give a baby to a mentally unstable, unemployed failure when the father is a successful executive with a stable home? Rachel grabbed the documents, her mind racing. These are illegal transfers. You forged my signature on half of these. This is fraud, Marcus. Securities fraud. Wire fraud. Marcus's hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to leave marks. Prove it. You're an emotional, pregnant woman who just found her husband with another woman. I'm a successful executive with the best lawyers money can buy. Who do you think they'll believe? He released her, shoving her backward. Besides, half the judges in this city play golf at my country club. The other half want to. I have David Rothschild's support, Rachel said desperately. He believes in me. Marcus and Jessica both laughed. Rothschild, Jessica said. He's just feeling sorry for you, probably wants to sleep with you. Men like him collect broken things. Get out, Marcus said flatly. Take your clothes, nothing else. The apartment's in my name. The car's in my name. The bank accounts are already frozen. Joint accounts need both signatures to access, and I'm not signing anything. You can't just, I can, and I have. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her a banking app. All their accounts showed zero available balance. Jessica's brother isn't the only judge I know. I've got a restraining order ready to file if you make trouble. Come near the apartment again, and you'll be arrested. Rachel ran. She ran from her own home, her own life, clutching stolen documents that proved her husband's betrayal. Behind her, she heard Marcus laughing, telling Jessica, let her go. She's too naive for business anyway. Always has been. That night, Rachel slept in her car in a Walmart parking lot, her hand protecting her growing belly. The temperature dropped to 40 degrees, and she shivered under a coat that smelled like the perfume of her former life. She whispered to her unborn child through tears that wouldn't stop falling. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I failed us. I'm sorry your father is a monster. I'm sorry I was too blind to see it. But in her other hand, she still held the evidence, and David Rothschild's business card. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as powerless as Marcus thought. I'm sorry, ma'am, but this card has been declined. Rachel stood at the pharmacy counter, her prenatal vitamins just out of reach behind the young cashier. 3 different cards, all declined. The fourth, her emergency credit card she'd hidden from Marcus, was reported stolen. There must be a mistake, she said, knowing there wasn't, her voice hollow with exhaustion. She'd been living in her car for 3 days, showering at a gym that hadn't yet figured out her membership was frozen too. The pharmacist, an older black woman with kind eyes, studied Rachel's face. The dark circles, the unwashed hair hastily pulled back, the way her hand rested protectively on her growing belly. These are prenatal vitamins, the pharmacist said quietly. How far along are you, honey? 4 months, Rachel whispered, tears threatening. The pharmacist glanced around, then slid the vitamins across the counter. They fell off the shelf. Damaged goods. Can't sell them anyway. Rachel's eyes filled with tears at the small kindness. Thank you, she mouthed. The pharmacist nodded. There's a women's shelter 2 blocks north. They serve hot meals. Rachel's phone buzzed. Marcus. Having trouble shopping? His text read. Joint accounts need both signatures to unfreeze. Come home and we can discuss. Jessica's gone for the weekend. She deleted it and called David Rothschild instead, standing in the pharmacy parking lot as rain began to fall. He's frozen everything, she told him, her voice breaking. I can't even buy food. I'm living in my car. Come to my office immediately, David said firmly. This has gone beyond simple divorce proceedings. This is financial abuse. I can't. I don't have gas money. I'm sending a car. Where are you? But when Rachel arrived at 3 tech companies that afternoon for emergency interviews David had arranged, she faced the same response everywhere. We were excited to meet you, the first interviewer said carefully, a woman in her 50s who looked genuinely sympathetic. But we received a concerning call about your mental state. Your former business partner, Sarah Mitchell, gave us a reference, the second explained, unable to meet Rachel's eyes. She mentioned emotional volatility, erratic behavior, inability to handle stress. The third was bluntest. Marcus Sterling called our CEO directly. He said you're having a breakdown, that you're stalking him, that hiring you would be a liability. He mentioned potential legal action against anyone who enables your harassment of him. Rachel sat in David's waiting room afterward, defeated. Marcus hadn't just frozen her accounts. He'd poisoned her entire professional network. Sarah Mitchell, her former business partner, her best friend since college, her maid of honor. The woman who'd held her hand through failed fertility treatments and celebrated with champagne when the pregnancy test finally showed positive. Her phone rang. Her mother. Mom, I can't talk right. Rachel, honey, I'm at the hospital. Your father, his heart. They're saying it doesn't look good. The world tilted. I'll get a flight immediately. But she couldn't. Every credit card was frozen. Every account empty. She called Marcus, hating herself for it, sitting in her car as rain hammered the windshield. Please, she begged, her pride shattered. My father's dying. Just let me access enough for a flight to Ohio. I'll sign whatever you want after. Come home, he replied, his voice smooth as poison. Be a good wife. Apologize to Jessica for making a scene, and I'll consider it. Marcus, please. He's dying. And whose fault is that stress on your family? Your business failure, your emotional breakdown, your inability to be a proper wife. Your parents must be so disappointed. She hung up. Her father died 18 hours later while she sat in a rental car she couldn't afford to drive to Ohio, 5 months pregnant, unable to afford the 1,000-mile journey home. Her mother's sobbing voicemail played on repeat. Where were you? He kept asking for you. The next morning, an eviction notice appeared on her windshield. The apartment Marcus had put in his name only was being sold. 48 hours to remove her belongings. She drove to Sarah Mitchell's office, her former business partner's name still beside hers on the building directory, a cruel reminder of everything she'd lost. Sarah, please, I need help. Sarah wouldn't meet her eyes, focusing instead on her computer screen where Rachel could see an email from Marcus Sterling in the preview pane. I can't, Rachel. I have my own company to think about. We built our first startup together in your garage. You were my maid of honor. You're my baby's godmother. Were, Sarah corrected. Were her godmother. And now Marcus is offering me $10 million in funding if I stay away from you. He's also threatening to bury my company if I don't. So you choose money over friendship? Sarah finally looked up, her eyes hard. You chose Marcus over our partnership, Amargo, when you let him into our business decisions. You chose him over everything. Now you get to live with that choice. I'm pregnant and homeless, Sarah. And whose fault is that? You had every advantage. Brilliant mind, supportive husband, successful career. You threw it all away because you couldn't handle the pressure. That night, 6 months pregnant and sleeping in her car again, Rachel felt the baby kick for the first time. Despite everything, she smiled through her tears. You're still fighting, she whispered. So I'll keep fighting too. She drove to a truck stop, parking under a light for safety. Other people lived in their cars here. Families, individuals, all with stories of loss. A woman in the RV next to her shared a can of soup, heating it on a portable stove. When you're at the bottom, the woman said, you find out who you really are. Rachel nodded, one hand on her belly, the other clutching David's business card. Tomorrow she'd fight back. Tonight, she'd survive. That's all she could do, survive and protect the life growing inside her. Sarah Mitchell's call came on a rainy Tuesday morning while Rachel sat in a library using their free Wi-Fi to apply for jobs under a fake name, the only way to avoid Marcus's poisonous references. Rachel, I feel terrible about everything. Let me help, quietly. Rachel hesitated. She was 7 months pregnant now, living in a weekly motel that charged by the hour for other services, surviving on food bank groceries and the kindness of strangers. What kind of help? Consulting work, off the books, cash only. Marcus will never know. Every instinct screamed danger, but desperation won. The baby needed proper nutrition. She needed a real roof over their heads before giving birth. What's the project? Redesigning our entire platform architecture. You're the only one who understands the original code well enough. 3 weeks of work, 50,000 cash. It felt wrong, but 50,000 would buy her time. Time to have the baby safely, time to disappear somewhere Marcus couldn't reach. Rachel took the boy, working 18-hour days from her motel room, her swollen feet propped on a broken chair, her back screaming in protest. She rebuilt Sarah's entire system, creating elegant solutions to problems that had plagued the platform for years. For 3 weeks, she had hope again. She found a small apartment in a building that didn't run credit checks, paid 6 months upfront in cash. She bought baby supplies from thrift stores, creating a nursery in the corner of the studio. She even bought a used car that actually ran, registering it under her mother's maiden name. Then the lawsuit arrived, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic. Violation of non-compete agreement. Damages sought, $2 million. The consulting work had been a trap. Every line of code Rachel wrote was documented, stamped, recorded. Sarah had screenshot every message, recorded every phone call, documented every minute Rachel had worked. In court, Marcus's lawyers were surgical, displaying her work like evidence at a murder trial. Mrs. Sterling knowingly violated legal agreements while claiming financial distress, the lead attorney stated, his voice echoing in the small courtroom. She had resources to work but claims poverty. She's either criminally deceptive or genuinely unstable. Either way, she's a danger to the tech industry's integrity. Rachel's public defender, an overworked man named Tom who had 30 other cases, was overwhelmed. Just take the plea deal, he advised during a 5-minute meeting. Accept the judgment, declare bankruptcy again. I can't declare bankruptcy twice in 6 months, Rachel protested. I'll never work again. No one will rent to me. I'll lose my daughter. You'll lose her anyway if you fight this. Marcus Sterling has 3 law firms on retainer. You have me, and I have 15 minutes. Rachel stood before the judge, 7 months pregnant, her swollen feet bleeding in her only remaining professional shoes, purchased from Goodwill and 2 sizes too small. Your Honor, I was trying to survive. My husband froze our accounts. I couldn't afford prenatal care. The law doesn't account for personal circumstances, the judge interrupted, his voice bored, checking his watch. Miss Sterling, you signed a non-compete agreement. You violated it. Judgment for the plaintiff. $2 million. Rachel felt the room spin. As she stumbled outside, the stress triggered contractions. Sharp, violent. Too early. No, she gasped, clutching her belly. Not at 7 months, please. An elderly woman called 911. The ambulance ride was a blur of pain and terror. Sirens, medical terms she didn't understand. The EMT's concerned faces, he said, "We need to move faster." The hospital lights were too bright, nurses moving with controlled urgency. Preterm labor, someone said. Get the NICU team ready. Please, Rachel begged. Save my baby. They stopped the contractions with medications that made her shake uncontrollably. Hours later, a doctor finally told her, "We've stopped the labor for now, but you're on complete bed rest. Any stress could trigger premature delivery, and at 7 months, your daughter would face significant challenges." Daughter? Rachel whispered. The doctor smiled slightly. Yes, a little girl. She's a fighter, strong heartbeat despite everything. Rachel laughed through tears, then sobbed. A daughter who might be born into homelessness, whose mother was now legally barred from working in the only field she knew. That's when David Rothschild walked into her hospital room, his face grim. Enough is enough, he said quietly, pulling a chair beside her bed. Rachel, it's time you knew the truth about your husband. He set a thick folder on her bed, the weight of it somehow ominous. What is this? The real reason Marcus wanted your company to fail. The real reason he's destroying you. And the opportunity to destroy him back. David opened the folder with the solemnity of someone revealing a death certificate. Inside were photographs, documents, medical records, police reports, a catalog of horror that made Rachel's personal betrayal seem almost quaint by comparison. 2 years ago, I started investigating Sterling Pharmaceuticals. David began, his voice carefully controlled. Your husband's miracle rise from junior sales rep to executive seemed impossible. A man with no scientific background, suddenly developing breakthrough drugs? Rachel's heart rate monitor beeped faster. A nurse looked in, concerned. I'm fine, Rachel assured her, though her hands trembled. She turned to David. What did you find? Marcus built his empire on stolen research and dead bodies. David pulled out a photograph of an Asian man in a lab coat, smiling beside 2 young girls. Dr. James Chen, brilliant biochemist, developed a revolutionary cancer treatment, died in a car accident 3 days after refusing to sell his patent to Marcus. Accidents happen. The brake lines were cut. David showed her the police report. The investigating detective was fired 2 days later. The case was closed. Rachel's hand went to her stomach protectively. You're saying my husband is a murderer? I'm saying he's killed at least 3 scientists. David laid out more photos. Dr. Maria Martinez discovered a cure for a rare childhood disease. Died of a heart attack at 35, no history of heart problems. Her research appeared under Sterling Pharmaceuticals' name a week later. Dr. Anthony Williams created a diabetes treatment that would have made insulin affordable. Suicide by hanging, despite his wife insisting he was happy, excited about their new baby. Rachel felt sick. The authorities are paid off. Marcus has judges, prosecutors, even FBI agents on his payroll. David pulled out financial records. But that's not the worst part. The Medicare fraud alone totals $80 million. He's been billing for treatments never given. Medications never dispensed. The cancer drug he's about to take public, it doesn't work. What do you mean? The clinical trials are completely falsified. Patients were paid to lie about improvements. Some who refused were threatened. Others disappeared. David's expression darkened. In 3 days, he's taking Sterling Pharmaceuticals public with a $500 million IPO based entirely on fraud. Thousands of desperate cancer patients will pay $10,000 per dose for sugar pills. Rachel stared at the evidence spread across her hospital bed. Why haven't you stopped him? Every whistleblower has disappeared or recanted. Every investigation has been shut down. The last FBI agent who tried to build a case was found dead of an apparent overdose. He didn't even drink, let alone use drugs. David leaned forward. But you have something none of them had. What? I have nothing. I'm nobody to him now. Exactly, you're nobody. The broken, defeated ex-wife. He thinks you're destroyed, harmless. He won't see you coming. Rachel laughed bitterly. Look at me, David. I am broken. I'm on bed rest, legally barred from working, $2 million in debt. No, David said firmly. You're a brilliant programmer who built revolutionary healthcare AI while Marcus was stealing others' work. You're a woman who survived betrayal that would destroy most people. And you're about to be a mother. That's not broken. That's powerful. He pulled out a phone, specially modified with recording software invisible to the user. This records even when it appears off. The battery looks dead, but it's recording. Get Marcus talking. Get him confident. He always confesses when he thinks he's won. It's his narcissistic weakness. Why do you care so much? Rachel asked. Why risk everything to stop him? David's expression shifted, pain flickering across his features. James Chen wasn't just a scientist. He was my best friend since MIT. His daughters call me Uncle David. I promised him I'd look after them, but I failed to protect him from Marcus. His voice hardened. I won't fail to get justice. Rachel looked at the photos again. 3 brilliant scientists murdered for their discoveries, their families destroyed, their life's work stolen. The IPO presentation is in 3 days? At the Ritz-Carlton. Every major investor in the country will be there. Marcus will announce the public offering, collect $500 million, and disappear to a non-extradition country before the fraud is discovered. What about Jessica? Well, she's in on everything. She's been laundering the money through offshore accounts, destroying evidence, paying off officials. They plan to marry in Switzerland next month. Rachel felt her daughter kick, strong and insistent. What do I need to do? David smiled grimly. First, we make Marcus think he's won completely. He needs to believe you're finished, destroyed. Then you walk into that IPO presentation and destroy him. How? Security won't even let me near the building. Leave that to me. I have friends in places Marcus doesn't even know exist. FBI agents who've been building a case in secret, waiting for the right moment. You just focus on getting him to confess. And if he doesn't, he will. Marcus's fatal flaw is his ego. He needs people to know how clever he is, especially people he considers beneath him. And no one is more beneath him in his mind than you. Rachel looked at the recording device. Such a small thing to bring down an empire. David, after this is over, if we survive it, when we survive it, he corrected, I want to fund your healthcare AI properly. The world needs what you built. Imagine the technology Marcus tried to bury actually saving the lives he was willing to sacrifice. For the first time in months, Rachel felt something beyond survival instinct. She felt purpose. She felt rage. She felt power. When do we start? Now, Marcus will come here to finalize the divorce. He won't be able to resist gloating one last time. As if on cue, Rachel's phone buzzed. Marcus, heard you're in the hospital. Time to discuss your future, or lack thereof. David stood. I'll be monitoring everything from outside. You're not alone in this, Rachel. You never were. As he left, Rachel held the modified phone, feeling its weight. 3 scientists had died for their discoveries. Her daughter deserved a world where brilliance wasn't met with murder. Time to end this, she whispered. Marcus arrived at the hospital with divorce papers and the kind of smile worn by executioners who enjoy their work. He looked perfect. Tailored suit, fresh haircut, the picture of success visiting his tragic fallen ex-wife. You look terrible, he said, pulling up a chair with theatrical concern. Stress isn't good for the baby. Our baby. Your baby, Rachel corrected, her hands secretly activating David's recording device. You made it clear she's yours to take. Marcus laughed. Oh, Rachel, still so dramatic. I'm not a monster. I'll let you have supervised visits, maybe every other weekend, if you stay stable. How generous, Rachel said, letting tears fall. They came easily these days. After everything we built together. Built together, Marcus's voice sharpened. You built nothing. You had a cute idea about helping poor people get health care. I built an empire. There's a difference, Reb. Your pharmaceutical company is impressive, Rachel admitted, playing to his ego. How did you manage it? You were just a sales rep when we met. Marcus leaned back, his smile widening. She'd asked the magic question. How clever was he? You really want to know? Fine. You're no threat anymore. He pulled out the divorce papers. Sign these first. Rachel signed with shaking hands, knowing the documents would be worthless once he was arrested. There, now tell me. I deserve to know how thoroughly you've beaten me. Marcus's ego couldn't resist. Remember when you introduced me to Dr. Chen at that Stanford mixer? Brilliant man, terrible business sense. He had a cancer drug formula worth billions, and he wanted to practically give it away to save lives. Marcus laughed. Can you imagine? Billions. And he cared about poor people. So you bought it from him? He wouldn't sell, said it was his life's work, his legacy for his daughters. Marcus's eyes glinted. So I made sure his daughters needed a new legacy. Car accidents happen all the time on Highway 101. Brake failure is so common. Rachel's stomach turned, but she forced herself to continue. The authorities cost less than you'd think. 50,000 to a detective here, 100,000 to a prosecutor there. The investigating officer is driving a new Tesla thanks to me. What about your miracle drug, the one going public? Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The only miracle is how easy it is to fake clinical trials. You pay the right doctors, eliminate the ones who won't play ball, and suddenly you have FDA approval for sugar pills that cost $10,000 per dose. Eliminate? Rachel's voice shook genuinely now. Dr. Martinez thought she could expose me. Potassium chloride causes heart attacks that look completely natural. Dr. Williams tried to go to the FBI. Amazing how depressed people can suddenly become when they threaten $500 million. His suicide note was particularly convincing. I wrote it myself. Rachel felt sick, but she had to get at everything. The FBI didn't investigate. The FBI agent who tried is dead. Overdose. Tragic how addiction can strike anyone. Marcus moved closer, his breath hot on her face. Do you understand now, Rachel? I'm untouchable. In 3 days, I'll be worth $500 million. Jessica and I will be in Switzerland, living like royalty, while you're here with a baby you can't afford. Jessica knows everything? Jessica planned half of it. The money laundering, the offshore accounts, the evidence destruction. She's brilliant. Everything you are not. She understands that power is everything. Morality is for people too weak to take what they want. Rachel let herself cry. Real tears for the scientists who died, for their families, for the patients who would suffer. Marcus mistook them for tears of defeat. Don't cry, he said mockingly. This is just natural selection. The strong survive, the weak perish. You're weak, Rachel. You always were. That's why your company failed. I made sure of it. You sabotaged my company? Every investor you met with received a call about your instability. Every potential partner heard about your emotional volatility. I killed your company as easily as I killed those scientists. He stood, buttoning his jacket. The IPO presentation is in 3 days. While I'm becoming a billionaire, you'll be in this hospital bed forgotten. No one will even remember your name. He grabbed her wrist, squeezing hard enough to leave bruises. But if you try to interfere, if you speak to anyone about this conversation, you'll have an accident too. Pregnant women die in childbirth all the time. Complications happen. No one would question it. After he left, Rachel played the recording for David, who had been listening from the room next door. We got him, David said quietly. Every confession, every threat, every murder. The FBI task force I've been secretly working with will be very interested. He threatened our baby, Rachel said, her voice steel. He admitted to killing 3 people. 4, David corrected. The FBI agent makes 4, and there are probably more we don't know about. Rachel felt her daughter kick, strong and insistent. She knows something big is coming. She's right, David replied. Justice is coming, and you're going to deliver it. I'm terrified, Rachel admitted. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. But remember, Marcus thinks you're broken. That's your weapon. He'll never see the strong woman walking into that presentation until it's too late. David helped her stand, steadying her as she swayed. 3 days to prepare. The FBI will have agents in place. You just need to walk in and play the recording. In front of everyone? In front of everyone. The investors, the media, Jessica. His empire will crumble in minutes. Rachel nodded, her hand on her belly. For the scientists, for their families, for my daughter. For justice, David added, and for the Rachel Montgomery who's about to remind the world what real strength looks like. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom buzzed with the electric energy of greed. 200 of America's wealthiest investors gathered for Sterling Pharmaceuticals' IPO presentation. Their conversations a symphony of numbers and projections. Marcus stood at the podium doing a sound check, his smile radiant with anticipated victory. Jessica beside him in a red designer gown that cost more than most people's annual salary, her hand possessively on his arm. Rachel waited in David's limousine 3 blocks away, her hands shaking as she adjusted the elegant black maternity gown. The dress had been David's idea. "You need to look like the queen you are," he'd said. Her hair and makeup team had worked for 2 hours, transforming the exhausted, broken woman into someone who commanded attention. "FBI agents are in position," David said, checking his phone. 20 agents, plus local police backup. "They have the recording, but we need Marcus to grandstand first. Let him dig his own grave deeper." Rachel nodded, breathing through Braxton Hicks' contractions that had started that morning. "Not now," she begged her body. "Just a few more hours." Inside the ballroom, Marcus began his presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed through the speakers, "today you're witnessing history. Sterling Pharmaceuticals will revolutionize cancer treatment, and you can be part of this $500 million journey." The investors leaned forward, eager. Marcus had never felt more powerful. The slideshow behind him displayed fake clinical trials, doctored patient testimonials, fabricated success rates. "Our drug has shown 93% efficacy in late-stage cancer patients," he lied smoothly. "At $10,000 per dose, with an estimated 50 million patients worldwide, we're looking at a $500 billion market." Excited murmurs rippled through the crowd. Dollar signs danced in their eyes. "Before we discuss numbers, let me share a personal story about overcoming failure," Marcus continued, his ego unable to resist. "My ex-wife, yes, the pregnant woman some of you may have heard about, was a failed entrepreneur, naive, emotional, unsuited for business. She nearly dragged me down with her weakness." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Some investors shifted uncomfortably. "But I learned from her failure. I learned that success requires ruthlessness, vision, and the courage to leave dead weight behind." He smiled at Jessica. "And now I have a partner who understands power. Someone who doesn't waste time on silly dreams of helping the poor." That was Rachel's cue. The ballroom doors opened with deliberate slowness. Silence fell like a hammer. Rachel Montgomery walked in, 8 months pregnant, wearing the elegant black maternity gown that made her look like royalty. Every step was measured, powerful, despite the pain shooting through her back. Her hair caught the light from the chandeliers. Her makeup was flawless. Her posture commanded attention. But it wasn't just her transformation that silenced the room. It was the man beside her, David Rothschild, the billionaire everyone in the room wanted to impress. And behind them, 6 FBI agents in dark suits, their badges visible, their faces grim. "Marcus," Rachel said, her voice carrying across the ballroom with surprising strength, "I believe you are telling everyone about failure? Let me tell you about real failure. The failure of a man who murders scientists for their discoveries." Marcus's face drained of color. "Security. They're with us," David said calmly. "FBI Agent Morrison, would you like to explain?" A tall woman stepped forward, her badge gleaming. "Marcus Sterling, you are under arrest for murder, fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy." "This is ridiculous," Marcus shouted, his composure cracking. "I'm about to make everyone here rich. This is just a jealous ex-wife's revenge fantasy." Rachel pulled out her phone, connecting it to the ballroom's sound system with a click. "Would you like to hear what Marcus really thinks about his miracle cancer drug? What he told me yesterday in the hospital?" Marcus's recorded voice filled the ballroom, clear and damning. "The only miracle is how easy it is to fake clinical trials. Pay the right doctors, eliminate the ones who won't play ball." Gasps echoed through the crowd. Investors started backing away from the stage as if Marcus were contagious. The recording continued. Dr. Chen thought he could expose me. Brake failure is so common on Highway 101. Turn it off, Marcus screamed, lunging toward Rachel. David stepped between them, solid as a wall. No, everyone needs to hear this. The recording played on. Dr. Martinez thought she could expose me. Potassium chloride causes heart attacks that look completely natural. Dr. Williams tried to go to the FBI. His suicide note was particularly convincing. I wrote it myself. The investors fled for the exits, their dreams of easy money replaced by horror. Camera phones captured everything. Marcus's empire crumbling in real time, already trending on social media. You destroyed me, Marcus screamed at Rachel, his face contorted with rage. No, Rachel said firmly, her hand on her belly as her daughter kicked. You destroyed yourself. You killed brilliant scientists. You stole their life's work. You were going to let thousands of cancer patients die for profit. I just turned on the lights. Jessica tried to run, her red dress flashing as she pushed through the crowd, but FBI agents blocked her path. She knew everything, Rachel announced to the remaining crowd. She brokered the illegal patent sales, helped falsify the trials, laundered the money. Check her laptop. It's all there. Every crime, every payoff, every murder planned in spreadsheets like they were grocery lists. An FBI agent held up Jessica's designer bag, pulling out a laptop, already secured as evidence. Jessica turned on Marcus, her composure shattering. This was your idea, all of it. I was just following orders. Following orders? Rachel laughed bitterly. You helped plan 3 murders, Jessica. You wrote the suicide note for Dr. Williams yourself. The metadata is still in the document. As the FBI handcuffed Marcus, he stared at Rachel with pure hatred. You were nothing. A nobody teacher with a failed startup. I made you. Rachel stepped closer, no longer afraid of him. You tried to make me nothing, but I was never nothing. I was a woman with vision, integrity, and strength. You just couldn't see it because you were blinded by your own ego. And now, while you rot in prison, I'm going to rebuild everything you tried to destroy. With what money? Marcus spat. You're $2 million in debt thanks to my lawsuit. David stepped forward. Actually, all lawsuits against Rachel are void due to your criminal conspiracy. Plus, Rothschild Ventures is investing $50 million in her company. The healthcare AI you tried to bury will help millions of patients. Everything you tried to prevent. The FBI agents began leading Marcus away, but he turned back one more time. You'll fail again, Rachel. You're too soft for this world. Rachel felt a sharp pain, a real contraction this time, but she stood tall. Maybe I am soft, but soft doesn't mean weak. It means I'll build something that heals instead of destroys. My daughter will grow up knowing her mother chose justice over revenge, integrity over profit. As Marcus was dragged out, screaming obscenities, several investors approached Rachel. Ms. Montgomery, one said, an elderly woman with sharp eyes, I'd like to discuss investing in your healthcare AI. As would I, another added. Real innovation, not fraud. But Rachel couldn't respond. The pain hit again, stronger. Wetness spread down her legs. The baby, she gasped. She's coming now. The limousine raced through San Francisco's streets, David holding Rachel's hand as she breathed through contractions that came in waves. The FBI had cleared their road to the hospital, sirens wailing ahead of them. Of course she chooses now, Rachel gasped between contractions. She has her father's timing, but hopefully not his morals. She has your strength, David said firmly, and your sense of justice. She knew exactly when to arrive, right as you delivered justice for those scientists. Rachel laughed, then groaned as another contraction hit. I need to call my mother. The call connected, and her mother's voice filled with tears of joy. I saw the news, sweetheart. It's everywhere. Tech entrepreneur exposes pharmaceutical fraud. You did it. Mom, I'm in labor. I'm already at the airport. I'll be there in 3 hours. At the hospital, the same nurses who'd cared for Rachel during her bed rest surrounded her with warmth. We saw the live stream, one said. You're a hero. I'm just a woman in labor, Rachel gasped. No, the nurse said firmly. You're a woman who stood up to a monster while 8 months pregnant. That's heroic. The delivery was swift. Her daughter apparently as eager to enter the world as Rachel was to meet her. After 6 hours of labor, Victoria Montgomery entered the world screaming, announcing her presence with the same determination her mother had shown. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, the doctor announced. Perfect APGAR scores. She's a fighter. Rachel held her daughter, tears streaming down her face. Victoria had a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to see everything already. Hello, Victory, Rachel whispered. You're named after today, the day justice won. David stood by the door, giving them space but remaining protective. The FBI needs a full statement when you're ready. Marcus is being held without bail. The murder charges alone will put him away for life. And what about Jessica? Trying to make a deal. She's offering evidence about other crimes. Senators Marcus bribed, judges he owned, other companies he destroyed. She's looking at 20 years minimum, possibly life. Rachel looked at her daughter, so innocent, so unaware of the battle that had raged around her. What happens to Sterling Pharmaceuticals? Being dismantled. The real research, what little wasn't stolen, will be returned to the rightful owners' families. Dr. Chen's daughters will receive his patents back. They'll be able to fund their education and continue their father's work if they choose. A knock at the door interrupted them. Rachel's mother entered, followed by someone unexpected. Sarah Mitchell. I don't want you here, Rachel said flatly. Sarah's eyes were red from crying. I know. I betrayed you. I chose money over friendship. I testified to the FBI about everything. The trap Marcus set, how he threatened my company if I didn't cooperate. It doesn't excuse what I did, but you're right, it doesn't. Rachel held Victoria closer. You left me homeless while pregnant. You helped him try to destroy me. I know. I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it. I just wanted you to know that I'm testifying against him, and I'm shutting down my company. I don't deserve success built on betraying a friend. Sarah left without another word. Rachel's mother took her place, cooing over her granddaughter. She looks like you did as a baby, her mother said, but she has her grandfather's chin, stubborn. I wish Dad could have met her. He knew about her. I told him you were pregnant before he passed. His last words were about you, how proud he was of his brilliant daughter who would change the world. That night, as Rachel nursed Victoria in the quiet hospital room, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. From the bathroom where she'd discovered her pregnancy while signing bankruptcy papers, to the courtroom where she'd been branded a failure, to the limousine that had carried her to justice. David knocked softly. You have visitors. The nurses wheeled in a television. You need to see this, one said. The news was covering the story nonstop. Pharmaceutical executive exposed by ex-wife's recording. Murder charges filed in Sterling Pharmaceutical scandal. Pregnant whistleblower brings down corrupt empire. But the story that made Rachel cry was different. Montgomery Health Technologies receives $100 million in funding. David smiled. Word got out about your healthcare AI. Investors are lining up. Everyone wants to be part of real innovation, not fraud. I don't even have a company yet, Rachel protested. You do now. I filed the paperwork this morning. Montgomery Health Technologies, incorporated in Delaware, with you as sole founder and CEO. He handed her a folder. There's also this. Inside was a document showing all of Marcus's personal assets, frozen by the FBI, would be distributed to his victims' families in the trial. But there was a provision for Victoria, a trust fund from the whistleblower reward, ensuring she'd never want for anything. Your daughter will grow up knowing her mother chose justice, David said. That's worth more than any inheritance Marcus could have given. 1 year later, Rachel stood at the New York Stock Exchange, Victoria balanced on her hip. The baby wore a tiny outfit that said, Future CEO, while Rachel wore an elegant white suit, powerful but soft, like her approach to business. Montgomery Health Technologies was going public at a $1 billion valuation. The AI platform she dreamed of now served the 300 hospitals nationwide, with expansion plans for rural clinics worldwide. They'd already diagnosed 10,000 rare conditions that would have been missed, saved hundreds of lives, and made healthcare accessible to communities that had been forgotten. "Ready to ring the opening bell?" David asked, smiling at how Victoria grabbed for his tie. Over the past year, he'd become more than a mentor and investor. He'd become family. "More than ready," Rachel replied. The bell rang out across the trading floor, and cheers erupted. Victoria laughed, clapping her tiny hands, unaware she was witnessing her mother's ultimate victory, but somehow understanding the joy in the room. The Wall Street Journal ran a feature that afternoon. From Homeless to Billionaire, the Rachel Montgomery story. But Rachel had insisted they focus on the technology, not her journey. Still, the story was impossible to ignore. The pregnant woman who'd brought down a murderous pharmaceutical executive was now running one of the most valuable healthcare startups in America. In her new office, a corner suite with views of the entire city, Rachel stood before a wall of press clippings she kept as reminders. Marcus Sterling sentenced to life without parole. Jessica Hayes gets 25 years for conspiracy. 3 scientists' families receive justice. Montgomery Health AI, a 10,000th patient. But the article that meant the most was the smallest, from a local Ohio paper. Free health screening saves 5-year-old's life. The child had been diagnosed with a rare cancer through Rachel's AI system at a free clinic she'd funded in her father's memory. Sarah Mitchell had written to her 6 months ago, a long letter of apology and regret. Rachel had replied simply, "Build something that helps people. That's all the forgiveness you need." Sarah was now running a nonprofit teaching coding to underprivileged kids, living modestly, trying to atone. Marcus had written too, from federal prison. Rachel had never opened his letters, instead filing them away for Victoria to read someday if she chose. Let her daughter decide what to do with her biological father's words. But Rachel had made sure Victoria would know the truth, age appropriately, but honestly. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Her assistant entered with a familiar face, Tom, the public defender who tried to help her during the lawsuit. "Ms. Montgomery, I know I failed you before." "You did your best with an impossible situation," Rachel interrupted. "How can I help you?" "I'm starting a legal aid nonprofit for abused women going through divorce. Women like you were, but without a David Rothschild to help them." "I was hoping—" "Yes," Rachel said immediately. "Whatever you need. Funding, technology, connections." "Yes." As Tom left with a commitment for $5 million in funding, David appeared with Victoria, who was fussing for her mother. "She's got your determination," he said, watching the baby reach insistently for Rachel. "And your sense of timing." "Speaking of timing," Rachel said, taking her daughter, "I have something to tell you." David raised an eyebrow. "We've been friends for a year. Partners. You've been amazing with Victoria. And I know, I'm ready for something more, if you are." David's composed exterior cracked, revealing genuine surprise and joy. "Rachel Montgomery, are you asking me out?" "I'm asking if you'd like to have dinner. Just us. Not talking about business or justice or in the past, just us." "I've been waiting a year for you to be ready," he admitted. "Yes, absolutely yes." That evening, as Rachel played with Victoria in their penthouse apartment, purchased with her own money, earned through her own brilliance, she reflected on the journey. Marcus had been wrong about everything. She wasn't nothing. She never had been. But more importantly, she learned that strength wasn't about being hard. It was about being resilient. It was about getting up every time you were knocked down. It was about choosing justice over revenge, integrity over shortcuts. "Your story is just beginning, little one," she whispered to Victoria, who was babbling happily. "And I'll make sure it's one where you always know your worth." Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Pick you up at 7. I know a place that serves excellent coq au vin." Rachel smiled. He remembered the meal she'd made the night she'd tried to tell Marcus about the pregnancy. But this time it wouldn't go cold. This time she was choosing a partner who saw her strength, not her utility. Victoria giggled, reaching for the phone, and Rachel laughed. "You're right, Victory. We won. Not because we destroyed someone else, but because we built something beautiful from the ashes." Outside, San Francisco sparkled with promise. The limousine that had carried her to justice was just theater. The real power was in the woman who'd refused to break. who'd chosen to heal rather than harm, who'd turned her deepest pain into purpose. She looked at the framed photo on her desk, her father holding her as a baby, his eyes full of pride and love. "I changed the world, Dad," she whispered, "just like you always said I would." Victoria made a sound that seemed like agreement, and Rachel kissed her daughter's forehead. The billionaire who'd arrived in a limousine? That was Marcus's fear made manifest. The real victory? That was the woman holding her daughter, building an empire on integrity, surrounded by people who valued her for exactly who she was. And this, all of this, was just the beginning.